In one of my previous videos, I attempt to do justice to Evelyn Sharp's life story. I flew to Ord, Nebraska, Evelyn's hometown, and visited the exhibit in their local museum about her. However, most of the information, if not all of the information about Evelyn Sharp that's out there, comes from this one book called Sharpie, written by Diane Bartels. I was so impressed at the amount of detail Diane was able to gather about Evelyn, having never met her, that I really wanted to meet up with Diane and learn about how she learned about Evelyn and learn about the process of writing this book. In August of 2023, I met up with Diane in Shenandoah, Iowa. First, we went for a flight in the Luscombe, named after Evelyn, and then we sat down for a long-form interview. This is that interview.
All right, we're live. Thank you for taking the time to come out here and be interviewed and talk about you and talk about how you got to tell the story of Sharpie.
It's my honor, Meredith. I'm glad to be here.
Tell me about yourself. How did you get into aviation?
My first experience with being in an airplane was when I was maybe 8, 9 years old, and the Soil Conservation Agency in the community in which I lived, they took farmers to look at soil conservation practices. And we lived on a farm.
Okay.
And my dad had built a dam, so that would be a soil conservation practice on the property. And so they asked him if he wanted to take a flight. And interestingly enough, the only plane he would fly in was Ralph Bierman's, and he had a Bonanza.
Okay.
And you just told me today you had a Bonanza.
A friend of mine had a Bonanza that he generously let me fly.
Okay,
But,
well,
yeah.
it's close.
Yeah.
The connection is somewhat close. So we took off at the Sioux City Air Base, Sioux City, Iowa Air Base. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that this is what I wanted to do. And then we get up to altitude, and I look down, and everything looks so beautiful. And at 8 or 9 years of age, I knew the world wasn't beautiful at that time, but it looked beautiful to me. And so I read everything I could about people who had been involved in aviation, like Lindbergh and World War II pilots. And then the only woman that I was able to read about who was a pilot, of course, is Amelia Earhart. And interestingly enough, in my research, I found that Evelyn Sharp was called the Amelia Earhart of Nebraska. So, anyway, my mother gave me a series of books, and they were called Signature. And one of them, the first one, was Amelia Earhart, and I still have that book. Mm-hmm. And they were called Signature because on the cover, they had Amelia's signature. Just like on your airplane, you have Evelyn's signature, okay? That is so cool, because a signature is really a part of a person. So we got down from the flight, and as I said, I just wanted to know more about aviation. And at the time I was at the university in Lincoln, a friend of mine was taking flight instruction out of the Union Airport. And so I used to go out there, not necessarily to be with him, but I wanted to watch the airplanes.
Yeah.
So then I graduated from the university, and I started my teaching career. And I say
English teacher, right?
Well, actually, elementary.
Okay.
I would have taught. It was they call them like general teachers because it's math, English, and everything. So I saved my money, and I went out to the airport, Lincoln, again, and I flew every day that I could that summer. And on August 12th of 1966, I earned my private pilot certificate. I've never looked back.
What did you learn to fly in?
Oh my gosh, I'm not sure I ever flew it. It was a Piper. Oh, what's that? Stubby wings. I'm going to forget.
Low wing or high wing?
Low. Oh no, high. Hi.
Or pacer?
Say again?
Pacer?
No,
Cub?
Maybe it'll come to me. Oh,
High wing?
I've forgotten.
Okay. I think the pacer's the only one I can think
But
of.
anyway,
it wasn't a tail dragger.
No, it was
Okay.
not.
I bet it was a tri-pacer.
No, it wasn't.
No?
No, I know it isn't. So maybe I'll think of it later.
Someone may know, yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't. I had a horrible time landing that thing. And then I was pregnant at the time that I earned my private pilot certificate, which I didn't know at that point. And so then I had I'm trying to think if I got this story mixed up now. Anyway, I got away from flying for a little bit, okay, because I was rearing and I had a daughter then in a couple of years, and so I didn't get back into flying, and when I did, I needed instruction, and so I got into a Piper 140.
Okay.
And I love that airplane. And I joined the 99s International Organization of Licensed Women Pilots. I belong to the Nebraska chapter.
Okay.
With the 99s, we used to fly to different communities and have breakfast, go to air shows. In fact, in 1973, we were at the air show in Evelyn Sharp Field in Ord, Nebraska, and that's where I first learned about her.
So before that, you didn't know anything about her?
I did not.
No.
She was pretty much lost, I would say, because her parents moved away from Nebraska, the local community of Ord, in 1940, and they did not return. Evelyn never married. There were no relatives, close relatives, to keep her memory alive, and so she just basically was forgotten. And but on a table similar to this.
Small airport out in rural country, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
The Sandhills of Nebraska. They call it North Central Nebraska. So on this table, as I recollect, it's a card table. And here's a picture of this woman I've never heard, seen, or read about. There were letters that she had written to this Dr. Glenn Abel, who was standing a little bit away from the table, kind of observing what kind of interest there really was in what he had created for people to look at. And pretty soon he comes over to me, and it's not very long in the conversation until he says, because he can see I'm interested, he says, "Can you write the biography of Evelyn Sharp?" And I'm thinking, I don't know. Single parent, full-time teacher, never having written, I'm not a writer, I'm a teacher. I can write, but I'm not a teacher. Or excuse me, I'm not a biographer. So anyway, what I told him was that I would begin to collect the research. And he had a lot of Evelyn Sharp's materials because he and John Sharp, Evelyn's father, adoptive father, they were good friends. They both lived in Ord. So that's what I did for several years. I went to the high school reunions, and at that time there were still a number of her classmates that were still living.
Yeah.
That would be in the early 80s.
Okay.
And so everyone was really pleased that I was collecting this information and that they really wanted to help share with what they had. So it was the summer before the fall of 1988 when I needed an endorsement for my teaching, and so I attended the university summer classes. They were called, this institute was called Stories of Great Americans.
Okay.
And so they were focusing on Nebraska. So Willa Cather and George Norris and whom am I interested in? Evelyn. Okay, yeah, she's got a great story.
Right.
I like that. So at the time came near the end of the course that we were to write a biography of some American who had a great story, Nebraskan who had a great story. And we had like mentors, and I had, the history mentor was connected to myself as a student. And so I needed to go to him and talk with him about Evelyn Sharp. He's history emeritus at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and he never heard of her.
Wow.
So I had to give the speech.
Yeah.
And he later told my teaching colleagues at school that he said there was no way I could tell Diane no. She did not have permission to write a biography of Evelyn Sharp. So that was my first writing, and again, more research and everything. And
so just to get the timeline, so that's 1988.
yeah, that's the summer of
Okay.
88. Is when
You
I was in
first
the-
met Dr. Glenn Alville
73.
73, okay. And so from 73 to 88, you've just been collecting data on your own, doing
That is-
research.
That is true.
You haven't committed to writing a book, but at least you're collating the information, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you got primary sources at that point,
I
right?
know. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in conjunction with this institute this summer, the Stories of Great Americans, it became I became aware of National Endowment for Humanities Teacher Scholar Award, and one of the professors at that institute said, after she heard my final what would I say, reading of the biography, I did it in the rotunda of the Nebraska State Capitol, along with a teaching colleague who shared Amelia Earhart and her story. So we connected. We were a twosome. We were the only two that, were talking about women aviators, and
One of them very well known, one of them literally
right.
no one's heard
Yeah.
of.
Just is incredible. People came up to me, these were all teachers, they come up to me afterwards and they said, Diane, you've got to finish this. So in the meantime, back to the National Endowment for Humanities Teacher Scholar Award, one of the professors says, Diane, I think you need to apply for this. So I found out what it was about, and when I looked at some of the previous teachers who had been selected, it was like the history of Aztecs and da-da-da-da. And I mean, it was all really pretty scholarly, and people, would at least have heard some aspect of, what they wanted to submit for a Teacher Scholar Award. And here comes Evelyn Sharp, or Nebraska pilot.
Yeah.
But I had a friend, I had a great spirit that was with me all the way on this. And there was a woman at the university who taught women's studies. And I never got to meet her. I never knew that she was the person selected to read some of the submissions for the different Teacher Scholar Awards in Nebraska. And she's the one, I think, because of her gender, because of her teaching women's studies, she said that I should receive the Teacher Scholar Award that year. There's only one of them. And that was another reason why I didn't think I had a chance.
Yeah.
Because of the subject.
And that award allows you to work full-time on your research and writing, right?
I received a sabbatical for a year from my Lincoln Public Schools, yes. And they gave me the sabbatical as well as the money to be able to continue, my work. And so I wrote that I was going to, in my submission, I wrote I was going to research and I was going to write the biography. So that whole next year, I traveled. Excuse me, I went west, where a lot of Evelyn's ferry pilots, men and women, were living. They'd retired,
Okay.
California,
Oh, sure.
New Mexico, Arizona. I went east to New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, where she died in a forced landing on Beacon Hill. And I just met incredible people who knew her and wanted to make sure that they could do whatever they could in order to make sure she was not forgotten.
So this is 89 then? 1988, 89?
That's when I was in the Institute.
Okay.
And I think it was 91, I flew, my daughter and I flew to Washington, D.C., and I accepted the award, the Teacher Scholar Award.
So going back to your research, the thing I really enjoyed about your book is the level of detail you were able to uncover. So there's details in here such as Evelyn rode a pony to school, and that was in the newspaper. How hard or how easy was it to find this? Were you going through a ton of archives, or were people telling you these stories? Like tell me about this process of how you were able to create such a colorful biography from someone who lived in the 1930s and 40s.
Okay. Thank you for the compliment, colorful.
You
I
bet.
appreciate that. I used legal size yellow tablets, and whenever I found a newspaper article doing research at the Nebraska State Historical Archives.
Okay.
I also received permission to go into the archives at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And I received permission to go into the archives of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And that in itself was somewhat unusual, because here I was, an elementary school teacher, and I wanted to go into these facilities where I could do research, and I don't know if I didn't think I had the credentials. Maybe I did. Maybe I sold myself short. I don't know. So anyway, I just went and I looked at photos, and they have histories, of the women Air Force service pilots, and I was just taking notes. Nebraska Historical Society, I went through newspapers. They were on microfilm, I think it's called. Yeah, you put it in a machine, and you scroll through, and so Evelyn kept notebooks, scrapbooks, and she had a lot of articles about where she had flown in Nebraska.
Okay.
And so I had some sense as to what newspaper to look in.
Oh, sure.
Okay, a date and that sort of thing.
Where did you find the scrapbooks?
Dr. Abel had those.
Okay.
And then a photograph album. There were two. One is a photograph album, and one is a scrapbook with newspaper articles and other kinds of memorabilia. And then from people whom I interviewed, also they gave me dates. Like I went to South Dakota, Spearfish, South Dakota, because that's where she instructed in the civilian pilot training program prior to our being bombed at Pearl Harbor. And so I talked with several of her students that she had trained, and these were students, at least the men were being trained because the War Department felt in 1940 that we would be drawn into the war that was already raging in Europe. And so a lot of these male pilots that Evelyn instructed, they went straight to bomber and pursuit school. Pursuit meaning fighters. Today we call them fighters. Excuse me. But anyway, some of them had returned from war, and so when I was doing my research, they were back in South Dakota. So I had an opportunity to interview them.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's amazing how you were able to kind of find that cookie trail, that crumb trail, and
it's just And I had all these, and so I would divide on my, in my downstairs area of my home, I had things in years, okay, you know, and that's how my file folders contain it too. And so I truly don't know, Meredith, how I put it all together. So, but my mind, I would read something and I would remember there was another piece of information somewhere connected to that, and then I would find it relatively easily.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that there was just some sort of presence that was able to make all this happen for me to create, you know, her colorful, as you said.
Again, I mean, the detail is amazing. I'll open up a random page here. There's, you know, there's poems that people wrote about her. I mean, obviously, I mean, people wrote letters back then, right? So and
Sure did.
And obviously, people kept the letters because they thought it was special, and it was probably in a shoebox somewhere in the attic, and you were able to find that.
Yeah, they...
Between letters and the newspaper, you know, there's... I wonder if someone 100 years from now could do the same thing about us.
Well, we don't have letters.
No, we put all our stuff online, but if...
And if the satellites go down, we're dead.
Well, if Facebook went bankrupt, like, think of how much, like, collective memory would be gone.
Well, think of all... I have so much on CDs, and now getting a CD player can become an issue.
Right.
And videotape. I have a lot of things on videotape.
Yeah.
And, you know, the VHS, is that right? Yeah, videotape. Yeah, see, all of that, what we're doing now, I don't know how it can be retrieved.
It's either going to be really easy or really hard, I think, 100 years from now. Because they could also just type in my name and everything I've done comes up. Yeah. So let's change gears to Evelyn, unless there's something else you wanted to talk about the process of putting this book together.
I think you have a fairly good understanding as to how it all came together. Okay.
And I think that the amazing thing here too is that maybe not. I would argue that if you hadn't walked into that air show and paid attention to that table, this story could have been lost very easily.
You are correct.
Like you said, I mean, she was, you know, she had no kids. She was adopted, wasn't married. Like, there was no real continuity of her bloodline and of her story. And in a town like Ord, Nebraska in the 1940s, there's probably not a whole lot of people moving out to tell that story.
Well, and even people in the airport, as I think I said a little earlier, it's named Evelyn Sharp Field. There's a P-38 prop hanging at the airport, which is the airplane in which she lost her life. Not that prop exactly, but an exact P-38 prop. And the field is named Evelyn Sharp Field. It's not called Ord Municipal Airport or whatever. People in town didn't even know or care to know who Evelyn Sharp is or was, however you want to look at it. You know, so I can't. Dr. Abel told me that day, the man who had put the things on the table, he said, Diane, I have had several people come to this town and they said that they want to write about Evelyn, but nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
And I know why. I mean, I think I know why. It was huge, time-wise, to do the research.
Right.
To write a biography that really, I think, represents her life and what she committed to do for our country.
And there's no payout, right? Like, that's the thing, is it's a lot of work, but...
Oh, well, no, I paid...
You're not money ahead with this book.
The book is right there. I paid, and I didn't have money to hire an agent, I think is what it's called, okay? So I did all this on my own, and like I said, there was a guiding force involved in all of this, and it turned out well. I'm happy.
Yeah, against all odds. And I'm so glad you did.
Thank you.
So when I bought that airplane, I was trying to think of, what do we name this plane? Our vehicle should have a name. And my wife's like, 1940s, Evelyn. Evelyn's a good name. And I was like, yeah, sure. Let's Google and see if there's any Evelyn connection, or like if there's nose art already of a plane named Evelyn that I can, copy or kind of iterate off of. And I came across Evelyn's Wikipedia page, and I did a little more digging. I came across articles you had written and that were on the internet. Most of them were some derivative that you had written. Okay. There wasn't a whole lot of other sources out there. So I looked on Facebook. I don't think you're on Facebook. I kind of looked online, and you're a hard person to find online, except I found, I think, something you posted on a class reunion page. Okay. And I sent you an email, and I think I left the phone number. And I still remember I was in Colorado Springs for work at the airport, and I got a phone call from a Nebraska number. I was like, who's this? And it was you.
Oh, okay.
So that's how I was able to connect with you, and obviously got the book, found it on Amazon. It's, again, not an easy book to find. Now it is, because you just call you or call me, and I'll get a book from you. And that's how I was able to learn about her. So, again, that thread of her story being lost is, it got so close. It got very close, and it makes you wonder how many other stories are dying out there, right?
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Everyone has a story, Dad. People don't live in a vacuum. They all have done something, been somewhere, made a difference in somebody's life. Yeah.
Especially that generation. We go back here. So Evelyn was born in 1930 or 1919. Okay, 1919.
There's a different. There's a on her marker at the Ord City Cemetery. It's
I think it's October 1st.
October 1st. Okay, but they didn't. When Evelyn died, her parents, they were working in a plant, a war plant, at munitions plant in Henderson, Nevada. And so when they came back home to Ord, because that's where they wanted her body to be brought, they had to get a cemetery plot and a marker and all of that. And I will never know why October 1st is on the monument, because I have her birth certificate. She was adopted by John and Mary, and the birth certificate says October 20th. So that's somewhat confusing to people, because they see the monument and then they see what I've written.
Yeah.
If they read the book. So I find, talking about things connecting, when she was accepted into the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, predecessor to the Women Air Force Service Pilots, which most people know as WASP, but she was one of 25 that was accepted into that first organization, WAFS, to prove to the country that women could fly the military airplanes during the war.
You were able to tell the story of Evelyn's biological parents and kind of their circumstances. Was that all just from newspapers? How did you put that together?
Well, I didn't know she was adopted for years doing my research. There were people in Ord who knew that, but they didn't quite know the whole story of why John and Mary adopted her. And as nearly as I can tell, they did not want to share only part of the story, not knowing who the original mother and father were.
Yeah.
So nobody.
And John and Mary had passed away by this point, right? By the time you became involved with the story?
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. I never talked to the birth parents or the biological parents.
So she was born in Montana.
Yeah, Millstone, Montana. Yeah. Okay. So how I found how I found the biological mother was that there was a couple that lived in Minnesota, and I knew the last name of the birth mother, and I cannot remember right now how I figured that out. But they had done some research because that biological mother was a great aunt or some relation to them, and had come back to Wisconsin to spend the rest of her life. Her name is Elsie, and she stopped in at this home where this couple lived that had contacted me, and she went in. He was an Air Force Academy graduate, I believe, the man living there, and went into this kind of like his study, and she walks over to this framed photo of military airplanes, and she starts to cry. This is Elsie, the biological mother. And he was like the executor he was going to be the executor of her estate. That's why she was there. And he asked her what was wrong, and she said, nobody has known this, but I had a daughter once who flew during World War II. That is the first time, because it was Evelyn was conceived by Elsie and Orla, and they were not married at the time. And we're talking about 1919, okay? Evelyn happens to be in Leipzig, North Dakota, where her sister is about ready to have a baby. They have a general store, and Elsie has come there to work, and then finds out she's pregnant. And so everybody, they just didn't want to talk about it. And eventually, Elsie and Orla do go to Carson, North Dakota, or North Dakota. Did I say it's New Leipzig, North Dakota? If I said the wrong state, and they get married, and then they go out to Montana. That's where we were going. Okay,
yeah.
Go out to Montana. Okay, because Orla, the biological father, his dad is a very prominent physician for the railroad, and so they have a maternity house in Millstone where the wives of the railroad workers go to have their babies. The family, the grandfather, they live in Miles City, Montana. So Elsie comes to Miles City to be with the family. It would be her father and mother-in-law. And she waits there until it's time to have the baby, and then she heads over to Millstone. So I think I used to know, I can't remember, but I think Elsie was late 20s. And here she is all by herself. She's pregnant. Orla has left the relationship. I never did find divorce papers, but I was told that was the situation. And so here she is out there all by herself in Millstone having this daughter. And so then she comes back with Evelyn. She'd named her Lois Genevieve Krause, I believe.
Yep.
That's who Elsie had named her. And so was there anything else you wanted to know about that? And then I can tell you how the John and Mary Sharp...
No, keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then Elsie can't stay there. She with her father and mother-in-law, and they don't have daycare or anything.
Sure.
She can't go to work, and the only work she ever had done was like being a waitress or something. You know, she didn't have education that allowed her to do earn a decent living. And so one night John and Mary Sharp were there, and John Sharp worked for the railroad. And of course, the doctor was the father-in-law was their, the railroad doctor, okay, for the workers. And so the baby is there, Elsie is there, and John and Mary have been married since 1905. This is 1919. And somebody says, John and Mary, why don't you adopt Evelyn?
Okay.
I don't know who suggested it, but
Yeah,
that's
but
what
somehow
I
it came up.
heard. And so I don't know if they had to think about it
Yeah.
or not, but eventually they did, and they kept they kept part of the name that Elsie had given to Evelyn, because Evelyn's name is Evelyn Genevieve Sharp, and the Genevieve spelled a little bit different, but at least they included the birth mothers.
It was Genevieve initially, right? And then Genevieve.
That's right.
Yeah,
You're
Genevieve.
right. It's Genevieve. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
VIE ends on the end of it, right? I think. I have to look at the spelling again.
Yeah.
But,
That's how I remember it.
so Elsie and her daughter Evelyn do meet up later on,
Yeah.
which I can get to, but
I think we'll get to that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. From an opportunity point of view, Evelyn's growing up in this small town in Ord, Nebraska, Depression era, Dust Bowl era, not an abundance of opportunity. Can you tell the story of how she ended up getting flying lessons?
Okay. So they came to they had several stops from Montana to Hastings, Nebraska, to Erickson, Nebraska. John was always moving around, finding work. Part of it probably was the Depression times, but also he had a drinking problem, which contributed to some aspects of his work life. So eventually they end up in Ord, and I would say it's about 1934. And they have John and Mary have a restaurant, bar, and rooming house. And of course, Lindbergh has flown across the ocean, not 27, I believe, and this is 34. So now flying is becoming kind of a reality in this country. And so Jack Jefford from Broken Bow, Nebraska, not too far from Ord, comes into Ord several days a week to offer flight instruction. And where does he stay? He stays at John and Mary's place. And here's this girl, Evelyn Sharp, and she's hearing all about this flight instructor and airplanes, and so it becomes very well known to a small group of people, at least, that she's very interested in flying.
She's 15 or so at this time?
Yeah, and her dad he's a promoter, her dad, okay? Mary was not quite as enthused about Evelyn learning to fly, but there's another story, I can tell you about that later. So one night, Jack Jefford, the flight instructor from Broken Bow, and John are sitting in the restaurant, and Evelyn overhears a conversation, and it goes something like this. And this came from a letter that Evelyn wrote to one of her friends about how this happened. Okay? So Jack says, "You know, John, I have been coming to Ord now for several weeks, and I'm just not making enough money to pay my room and board bill. So how would it be if I gave your daughter free flying lessons?" And Evelyn wrote in the letter, she said, "I held my breath until my dad nodded his head in agreement."
So it was Jack's idea, not John's idea.
It was Jack's idea.
Okay.
Jack Jefford.
Okay. Good idea.
It was the beginning of most of her life story, you know.
Yeah.
Her parents did not have money to support flying lessons for her. There were townspeople who were ready to step up, okay, and support, like Dr. Abel, the one I first met, you know, in the hangar. But yeah, this was a gift.
Yeah.
And this started her on her way, and Jack was her instructor, and she just moved through her certificates or licenses, whatever you choose to call them, just one right after another. She had community support from Dr. Abel and his family. They had a benefit dance to raise money so she could come to Lincoln and work on her commercial. They called it transport license at that point. So it was just a gift, and I never had the opportunity to meet Jack. I know of him, the pilot, because of he has several books written about him and his life, and he flew weather for the U.S. Weather Bureau. He was in Alaska and made several rescues of people out, you know, in the outback or whatever it's called. But I never got to meet him, which I don't know if he really realized that what an influence,
what an impact he had.
He was.
Whatever happened to him? Did he have a family at all? Do we know?
Jack?
Yeah.
Jefford? I actually met his wife sitting in the lobby of the Grand Island airport years later. She was with some musical touring group, not Fred Waring, but some other group. And I don't know, she introduced herself, Jefford, and I just said, "You happen to know Jack Jefford?" Yeah, he was my husband. By that time, he had died.
Wow.
So.
What a small world.
Yeah, Mary Dad, I'm trying to connect all these things that just seem to happen.
Yeah.
Seem to be in the right place at the right time for just a lot of what you read about in her biography.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so, you go to Ord. She's given thousands of rides to people, and you were able to collect anecdotes from people that went up with Evelyn Sharp in a tiny little Taylor Cub. I mean, we just went out for a little flight, right? Went half hour. Yeah. Like, she was doing that all day long. Like that's work. That's a lot of work, flying those underpowered airplanes.
It was exhausting, I think, and sometimes
it's got that youthful energy.
Sometimes people didn't show up, and she'd be writing a letter underneath the wing of the airplane, and she. There were times she was discouraged. I know, but she persevered, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so important for young people to understand that she was not given a lot to make this life that we read about happen. She made a lot of that happen herself.
Yeah, there's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I mean, she was kind of like one of a kind at this time in Nebraska. 35, 36, 37, whatever. She was just almost a singleton, and she certainly was not. There wasn't any competition by any other woman who was putting an ad in the newspaper, local newspaper, and getting a farmer to mow their alfalfa for a runway, and then flying over the community and encouraging people to come out to the airport or to the runway.
To the grass strip,
To the grass strip, she worked hard.
Yeah.
Over 5,000 people. I have a log that I think John Sharp was with her. Her dad was with her a lot, and they had this this book that some of the writers to whom she gave rides said that they would sign their name in the book. And I have a typed copy, and I'm sure that John took, after she died, John took the book, probably fell apart, and wrote. But yeah, I have some great, I think, wonderful stories about especially young men who, young men felt she was beautiful, and she would show up in this airplane and she was dressed nicely, and they wanted to ride with her. And there's this one man that said that all the time he was like baling hay and getting money for it, he was thinking that he would get this ride with Evelyn Sharp. And then when the day came and he had the money and he saw her, he said, I talked with him, interviewed him. He said, I didn't know if I could walk out to that airplane, Diane. And he said, all of a sudden, he looks up, he says, and Evelyn is going like, come on. And so he gets in the airplane. This is a Curtis Robin now that she has airplane, that she's doing a lot of this barnstorming with, where she's giving people rides. They called it barnstorming, not flying through a barn with open doors, And so he gets in the airplane and, get the seatbelt and everything all on, and start down the grass strip, alfalfa strip, and all of a sudden, she's like fidgeting. He's sitting in the back. She's like she's fidgeting, and she says something about a grasshopper, and the grasshopper has flown inside her shirt.
Oh no!
And she's trying to get it out, and so she eventually gets it out, and I think it is. I can't remember exactly how the story goes, but at some point, she asked him about, did he know that there was this grasshopper? And he said, no. He said, I didn't see it. But then he told me, he said, I just noticed she had a blue blouse on or something like that, so. Just precious stories of what her presence created in thought with people who, and memories that knew her.
Well,
a lot of them said they were in love with her. I mean, these young men.
I'm sure she got a lot of letters.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting how, these memories persist 70 years later, 60 years later. It's really cool. So Evelyn gained a lot of experience flying people around. She certainly gave many, many rides, lots of takeoffs and landings. She became an instructor, and then she joined the civilian pilot training program to continue making money while flying, because barnstorming wasn't actually paying the bills as well as she had hoped. And so she goes into this program, she starts teaching men how to fly, and then a directive comes out where Nancy Love is basically looking for the elite pilots, the elite female pilots in the country, and she's selected. Do you want to pick up the story from there?
Yeah. So, as you said, Evelyn is instructing in the civilian pilot training program at Spearfish. She leaves there and she goes to Bakersfield, California, where there's a similar program. The word had spread about this young female pilot who is this instructor, and he wanted her. And then Pearl Harbor is bombed, and so civilian flying, even though they were preparing men to fly militarily, civilian flying is what Evelyn was doing, and that operation had to move 150 miles inland from the coast.
Oh, sure.
And so her employer selected Lone Pine, California, and that's in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And so Evelyn flies the Waco, one of the training airplanes. she and Scotty, her dog, are in the Waco, and they're flying east to the Sierra Nevada community of Lone Pine. And while she's there, this telegram comes from the War Department, and women who have, I think it's at least 350 hours of flight time, are asked to consider whether or not they would come east to Wilmington, Delaware, to Newcastle Army Airfield, and see whether they could fly for the military. There are 28 women who have been called across the country, accepted that they will come. And so they have a flight test that they're required to take, a PT-19 airplane, and some health records need to be filled out. And Evelyn does her flight with a military airman, and she passes, and he signs her logbook on October 20th of 1942.
Okay.
And that's her birthday.
Yeah.
But she didn't know that.
Right. So had she flown anything like a PT-19 before, and how successful were other women? How hard was this test? Did the Army make it easy for them to get into this program?
I don't know the answer to that. I truly don't. I don't know how many women showed up. I just know they ended up with 28, and Evelyn was actually a 17th member to be accepted into that group.
The general period, though, the Army wasn't hugely excited about letting girls fly their airplanes. So I imagine it's probably a pretty selective test or a pretty selective process. Or maybe I'm speculating.
Well, it was a quiet process,
Okay.
I'll tell you that. Okay?
Yeah.
Because even when they were flying, delivering these airplanes or instructing men to become pilots, or flying an airplane with a Muslim sleeve behind it that men on the ground were shooting toward, anti-aircraft type, whatever they call it.
Gunnery target.
Gunnery, yeah. So, I don't know how difficult it was. I have had people pilots tell me, that with the experience that she had in flying, the hours that she had, that the PT-19 would not have been a very difficult plane to transition to and to do well in. But I've had no experience with that, so I don't know. But she did it.
So she got accepted into the program, and so Nancy Love was in charge of that program.
That is correct.
Also a very accomplished pilot herself. Then, coming out of England, you have Jackie Cochran, who's probably a little peeved that this program's going on and she's not in charge of it.
Right. More than a little.
Yeah.
She was livid, is what I've been told. And she got with Hap Arnold, General Hap Arnold. And she pretty much laid out, you told me before I left meaning Jackie Cochran speaking, you told me before I left to join the women pilots fighting the war from England, you told me that women would not be accepted into what I had suggested. And then here you go, and you've got Nancy Love. So Hap Arnold figured out how to save the day, and Jackie starts this school down, first of all in Houston and then Sweetwater, Texas, where women can enroll if they had initially 35 hours. And
I think it was like 500 initially. It was very high initially.
Oh, really? I thought it was 35.
As they progressed and the need became greater, there's a great book called Women with Silver Wings.
Yes.
That goes into that detail. I think it was either 250, 300, or 500 hours for their first class. And because there was a lot of pressure on on Jackie to prove this program would work. So kind of like the WASPs, they started super selective, and then towards the end of the WASP program, they were accepting, they kind of had a better funnel and a better training pipeline, so they started accepting 35 hours later on.
Okay.
But
I didn't remember that. I thought
Yeah.
they started out with 35. Well,
it was a high number. It may
Okay.
not be 500 because that's a
Okay.
lot. It might be
Okay.
something else, but eventually they did come down to 35.
So Jackie was going to then train these, this program was going to train the women to have a larger workforce to be doing the work of the women Air Force service pilots, and Nancy Love was going to be in charge of like pilots is once they had accomplished.
Yeah.
And of course she already had, Nancy Love already had the 28 Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron pilots, and eventually they were merged, and both groups, they served under the WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots.
So at some point, Evelyn got transferred to Long Beach because that's where a lot of manufacturing was happening there.
That's right.
But a lot of aircraft were being shipped from New Jersey and kind of on the East Coast. So, she can you talk about some of the aircraft that she was qualified to fly in?
Well,
I have the list somewhere too.
I can remember some of them. She started out on the East Coast, of course, with trainers out of Long Island and Lock Haven, and then when she went west, like you said, there were a number of aircraft manufacturing plants out there, and so the P-51, the C-47. The BT-13 and 15.
I think she flew the B-25 as well.
I think she had the B-25 also.
She never flew the B-17, I don't think.
She was co-pilot on the 17, but
Okay,
she lost
but not...
her life before if she had completed that flight in the P-38 to Newark, New Jersey, where they landed on the docks, they took the wings off, and they put him on the hold, I guess it's called, of the ship, and took him overseas. If she had completed that flight and returned to Long Beach, she would have taken an A-20 to Great Falls, Montana, and her biological father, whom she had never met, was going to meet her there. He lived in Missoula at that time. His niece told me, his name is Orla, his niece told me that it was really hard on him because, he had walked away from the marriage and he'd never had an opportunity to spend any time with his daughter. So,
But Evelyn did get to, so her biological mother was known as Aunt Elsie, and they had a seemingly good relationship, and at some point you had told a story about how she found out that she was in fact adopted.
Yeah. Well, Elsie used to come to
Did she live in New York?
Well, she lived all over. She was in California for a while.
Okay.
And but when Evelyn connected with her, and the story continues about the birth, Aunt Elsie was in New York at that time.
Okay.
And Elsie was in Wilmington, Delaware at that time.
Well, that's convenient.
With the WAFs. Yeah, it worked out well. But before that, Elsie would come to Nebraska, and one of the times I know that she did was when Evelyn was flying out of North Platte, giving people rides, And so she loved being with Evelyn and flying. She was adventurous, Elsie was, just like Evelyn is. And they danced to the wee hours of the morning whenever they had an opportunity to go to a dance. And it is a credit to John and Mary Sharp that at that time that Elsie was accepted into being around Evelyn as Aunt Elsie into yesterday's world, that wasn't always the case. There was a definite break between the biological and the adoptive. Okay, but I credit John and Mary for making that happen. So anyway, Evelyn comes up from Wilmington and to New York, and they're sitting in the restaurant, Rogers Corner, and it is Rockefeller Center. Okay. Where the gold statues that they have there. And I have the let's see, it's a folder that somebody has taken a picture of Evelyn and her mom, and they've put it in this folder, and it recognizes where they've been, when, what they've been doing at the restaurant location. I can remember when I used to go to Sioux City with my mom, that sometimes the restaurant would provide that kind of a folder. They don't do it anymore, of course, but it used to be that. It was pretty special. Anyway, that night, Elsie says something to the effect that, you don't know this, Evelyn, but I am your mother. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how much Elsie told Evelyn about the circumstances of her birth. I have a letter in her book that talks about Evelyn finding out and how she hoped that Elsie was proud of her, and but she would never forget what John and Mary had done for her as adoptive parents. And so Elsie decides, when Evelyn gets transferred out to California, Elsie decides she's going to go out to California and she can spend more time. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of time left to spend, because Evelyn was flying a lot, delivering airplanes, of course, and then she lost her life soon after Elsie moved out there. Yeah.
Well, and it's important to talk about the schedule these girls had, because I fly this old plane, maybe a few states over, and I'm exhausted, right? Like, there's no autopilot. You're flying it the whole time. They're not comfortable. You got to hand fly it the whole time. These girls are flying high-performance aircraft, cross-country, drop them off. They get the first flight back, repeat, do it again. Or take a bus. Yeah. The I don't know, I'll say the War Department, they could not ride in an airplane other than commercial back to their base. That was the way it was all over. I mean, we had a base in Dallas, Texas. There was one in Michigan, Long Beach, and Delaware. And then of course Delaware. Yeah. And so if there was like a plane going back that had 2 or 3 seats in it, and there was a man flying it in the military, they were not allowed to. There was definitely that separation of, it was required. And so sometimes they had to take a bus all the way back. And then load up in another plane and go again.
Yeah, they would come in. They would come in on one flight, and they would get orders for the next day, and so they would rinse out their shirt and make sure that it dried, and put it back on the next day, and then be off to the airport.
Yeah. Let me reset that one real quick. Okay. So Evelyn got a few hours of instruction in a P-38, and then three in a P-30, which the P-38 at the time, like, to put it in perspective, it was like the F-22 of today. It was highly maneuverable, very powerful.
Or the F-35 even.
Yeah, like that was a state-of-the-art aircraft, incredibly complex to fly. There's a story in Robin Olds' biography where he talks about getting the P-38 and how they would get these planes and still had the perfume of the WASP pilots on them. Yeah. He was describing the aircraft like, the smell of new leather and the perfume of the WASP pilots, right? So it's kind of cool that these aircraft were flown by these girls that, again, the Air Force or the Army wasn't sure they could fly airplanes to begin with, and here they are flying the most advanced aircraft of the time.
With little training.
Yeah, with
in
3
little
hours of
time.
training.
Yeah, yeah.
That's really something. And so Evelyn goes on this ferry flight with the P-38. Was that her first ferry flight?
With the
P-38?
38, yes.
Okay. She makes it to New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. She's having some issues with one of the engines. It seems like she's writing down in a maintenance log something about the left engine not quite performing well, or maybe needed more oil.
Well, she wrote it in a letter that someone gave me the letter, and also she had breakfast the morning. She stayed overnight in Harrisburg after landing at the New Cumberland Airport, which is right across the river. And the story goes that she talked about the airplane wasn't running as well as she thought it should, but they couldn't find. Everywhere she stopped, there were maintenance checks, and I never could identify by looking at the oil. I had the oil records. I had all of the maintenance reports up until New Cumberland. Okay, so I don't know how much oil they put in the airplane at New Cumberland. Okay, and that was the last, of course. And so there was something that was going on, but I don't know what. And many people say that they'd like to know, what the tear down of the engine found. And as far as I know, they never took the engine to there was a place in Alabama that they looked at engines of accidents, where accidents had occurred, but I never was able to find any information about that. So I don't know what caused it for sure.
Yeah.
Some people think it's sabotage. In 1944, there weren't as many male pilots that were needed to be in the United States training. And so those pilots, when they lost their jobs, so to speak, they went overseas. And so there was a huge discrediting of the women pilots for taking male pilot jobs.
Yeah.
And there are records of sugar in the fuel tank, where it was sabotage, I guess is what you would call it. So I don't know whether that's true or not.
Sure.
So.
You'd like to think that's not true, right?
Well, yeah, for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But you
But,
know how people are.
Yeah, people are gonna people. So she's going down the runway, taking off. You do a beautiful job in the book of reconstructing that. I'm guessing you've talked to P-38 pilots, you've looked at the checklist, you've looked at the flow. The book starts right off with, Evelyn in the cockpit in the P-38 and going through her checks and describing the takeoff. She loses her engine on or shortly after takeoff.
30 seconds.
Okay. So, yeah, that's not a great time. I'm guessing that plane's fully loaded with fuel for...
I would think so.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I didn't get those records, like I said. Okay.
Yeah, it's fair to assume from Harrisburg to New Jersey, they're probably filling that plane up. And, we for my video, we tried it in Flight Simulator. We loaded up the aircraft and killed one of the engines on takeoff, and it was not an easy plane to fly. And I don't even know how to fly the plane, so that's. So she kind of. It looks like, looking at it from a pilot's perspective, you have a river, you have some hills. Where are you gonna go, right? And she kind of clears some of the hills, finds a grassy patch, puts the plane down. She never really spun in or crashed. It really seemed to me that it was just one of those weird fluke accidents where the nose gear comes through the floor because of how the P-38 is designed. So The nose gear collapses through the floor, ejects her out, and kills her on contact.
Yeah, seatbelt, harness, shoulder harness breaks because the seat's pushed up with the nose gear, and she goes up, canopy goes out with her. About 10 feet away from the airplane is where she rested.
Yeah.
But I just think it's important for whomever is watching this that they know that her airplane did not spin in nose first. She kept control of that airplane. She was a phenomenal pilot.
Yeah. I think
she flew to the end.
Yeah, that's what they say, right? Is flight all the way into the crash, and it's. I don't know if people haven't flown twin engine airplanes. It is so incredibly easy to flip an airplane over if you're a single engine. If you try and turn into your dead engine, there's thrust on the right side, none on the left side. It is, even today with all the training, people still have rollovers in twin engine aircraft after they lose an engine.
Oh, really?
And those are pretty benign civil aircraft, right? That might be something like a Beech Baron. Here she's flying a fighter that's not designed to be flown to be easy. And yeah, absolutely, she was killed because of some fluke impact. It's not, she never lost control of the aircraft. She put it down in a pretty small patch of grass. And you know, probably if 10 people had the same crash, I bet 9 of them would have walked away. Just there's the wreckage isn't that deformed, right?
Oh, no. The tail, the long booms, if that's what they're called,
Yeah.
you know, because of, I don't know, physics, I guess, which
Sure.
I can't explain it. They're kind of bent a
Yeah.
little bit. But no, the flight deck, there's nothing wrong with the
No.
flight deck except the canopy's gone because it went
Yeah.
out with her.
Yeah, and you know, the procedure for landing off airport is you leave the landing gear up, right? You don't want your landing gear down to get snagged on something. I mean, the airplane never caught fire, considering it's full of fuel. It's like you said, she knew what she was doing. I don't think she lost control at any point. She managed a very difficult situation,
And the reason she chose to turn left is into the dead engine, and I don't fly twin engines, okay, so I don't know about that. But I've read that you don't turn into a dead engine, okay? But to her right, as she was taken off on 350, I think it was, is Harrisburg. Well, she's got, you know, the fuel on board. Straight ahead is the borough of New Cumberland, and then left over here is this farm ground. There's a few farmhouses on it, but I think she chose to go left into the dead engine because of consideration of life that would have been in the other two directions. And she didn't know how high the airplane was going to be flying, you know, if she went right or straight ahead. So she made that decision. And right now, Meredith, there is a flag, a United States flag, on top of where she put the airplane down. It flies 24/7. Below it are pieces of concrete that are in the shape of wasp wings. They're broken, however, because a man on whose property the P-38 came to rest has down at the bottom of Beacon Hill in a arboretum preserve, he has a memorial monument to Evelyn with 3 P-38 blades, a nice plaque that tells a little bit about her story, and a set of wasp wings that are not broken. But he put those broken wings up there underneath the flag. And when I went there for the dedication of her memorial, he said to me, Diane, I don't know, maybe I should not have put those broken ones there. I said, David, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It is representative of why she is being remembered here. And even though literally the wings of her P-38 did not break, her wings for flying were broken.
Mm-hmm. Now, the messed up thing about this is she did not get any veteran recognition. Her fellow pilots had to pool money together so they could give her family, a few $100s. Like, there's no veteran recognition, no military honors for her funeral. I think one of her WASP pilot friends went back with her remains to Ord.
Nancy Batson.
Okay.
Yeah. Accompanied the body in the train.
Yeah.
All the way from New Cumberland or Harrisburg to Ord. Mm-hmm. Yeah, by rail.
And then, so her burial was a big deal, obviously. I mean, she was Ord's daughter and most well-known daughter, and a huge turnout for that. You had talked about the Air Force officer story?
I do, but let me tell you about no military rights. So when Nancy Batson got onto the platform from the train, there was a man that was walking toward her, and he had a flag, United States flag, and he gets up to Nancy, and there are tears that are rolling down his face, and he says, "Here." And he hands her the flag. Well, there was to be no flag on any of the women pilots who died during the war. And but Nancy came to a dedication or an Evelyn Sharp Days event one year, and she was telling me this story. And she said, Diane, I could not say, oh, Evelyn can't have a flag on her casket. So Evelyn Sharp had a flag, a United States flag on her casket.
Who was the man? Do we know who that was?
I think it's Glenn Obel.
I bet it was too.
Yeah, I think it was Glenn. I tried to describe him to Nancy, but John Sharp had a much different physical presence. He was a big man, and of course was not as old as Glenn. Okay. So I'm pretty sure it was Glenn Obel. He was so supportive of Evelyn. I can see him doing that. And if I had known about that before Glenn died, because I did, I had an opportunity to talk with him, I would have asked him.
Sure,
but he died before I could do that. So
yeah. When did you get to interview Nancy?
Well, I'm trying to think if it were dedication day in 1996, or if she came to one of the other Evelyn Sharp days that we had. I think she might have been there in 1996.
Was she a WAFS pilot originally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and she flew P-38s also.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was very accomplished. She has a biography written of her too.
Okay.
Nancy Batson Cruz. Yeah. So you were asking about this.
Yeah.
So one day, I'm always getting calls. You're dead.
I'm one of them.
I tell you, this is how blessed I am for people like you, David back in New Cumberland, and Mark, maybe that will eventually find it possible for me to get the airplane back by similar to what you fly. So anyway, I get this call from someone who's retired in the Air Force, and he wants to know if he can put a pair of his wings, Air Force wings, at the cemetery. So this is what I wrote about that. 1/2 mile to the southeast of Evelyn Sharp Field, a simple white wooden cross marks the grave site of the only woman to be inducted into Nebraska's Aviation Hall of Fame. If you were to visit, it would not be unusual to find a mixed bouquet of wildflowers lying on her grave. Once a year, a wreath of yellow flowers tied with sapphire blue ribbon is placed against the traditional red granite monument. Beside it is a small wooden plaque carved by a man who also left her a pair of his Air Force pilot wings. For him and countless others, a young girl who grew up in Nebraska and gave her life in service to our country has not been forgotten.
Yeah, I think that's as good of a place as any to wrap this out.
Okay.
Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else that you've come across your research that maybe you weren't able to validate enough to put in the book, but that you just want to get out there? I think, didn't we have a conversation about how she may have been engaged, maybe?
Well, I have a small handbag that I believe someone at Long Beach, or maybe it was with her in the airplane, I don't know, in the P-38. Anyway, it found its way back to Mary. Mm-hmm. And
her mother, her adopted mother.
Yeah, her adoptive mother. And in that bag was, I think that's where I found a list of what was in that bag, if I'm remembering correctly. I know I have a list, okay? Maybe it wasn't exactly in the bag. Sorry, I can't remember that. But in it, it listed that there was like a diamond ring. Now, she was not married. She was dating a man that I think possibly marriage after the war could have been a reality, but they were not engaged. Mm-hmm. And so my assumption is that because she was attractive, that she perhaps wore this ring on her wedding ring finger, so that she didn't have to go through a long explanation as to, I'm sorry, I just don't really want to go to a movie with you.
Yeah.
Or something.
Sure.
You know.
That seems plausible.
Yeah. And I asked Frank, that was her boyfriend, her current boyfriend. She always lacked the confidence to think that some man would eventually find that she was someone that they would like to marry. She had very definite feelings about smoking, mm-hmm. and of course about drinking because of her dad.
Yeah.
And
I think it's worth clarifying, she did not smoke or drink at all.
That is correct.
Yeah. She was also asthmatic.
Yes, yeah. She had very serious asthmatic issues, almost died. But some of the South Dakota, the people that were being instructed in South Dakota, they told me, a couple of the guys said, you know, she did not like the fact when I got drunk, meaning the guys, okay, got drunk, or, yeah, so, I think perhaps Frank and Evelyn could have made life together reality, mm-hmm. but it would not be.
Yeah.
And he since has died too, but at least I got to talk with him. Mm-hmm. And he had very nice things to say about Evelyn. Very nice.
Yeah, your research, again, is so important because it spans this period of time, very long period of time for a book. And you were able to talk to these primary references that if someone like me tried to do that today, it'd be impossible. So,
Well,
yeah.
I don't know. Thank you.
Anything else you want to talk about, Evelyn, or your story? How do you keep busy nowadays? What do you do nowadays?
I'm a volunteer. A lot of military organizations and young people, because I was a teacher and wanting to share, her life. I see her as a role model. Also, for adults to make the commitment to do, to persevere through hardship. Good grief, look at our country, a lot of adults are struggling and need to find where they can be committed and persevere and not give up.
She had every reason to come up with an excuse, right? From her surroundings, her upbringing, her asthma. That's
Well, and just being a woman.
Right. Yeah. That's the biggest one, arguably.
But that community of Ord was so supportive.
Yeah,
of
it's
her.
amazing.
Yeah, I can think of some communities today that would not be supportive of someone who wanted to do and accomplish what she did.
Yeah.
No, they were. There was a woman who was the mother, I think, of the newspaper editor, and she used to write a column every week. And
the Ord newspaper editor?
The Ord, the Ord Quiz, it's called. And she wrote really nice things about Evelyn and how proud Ord was of her. And then we got, Dr. Abel, who stood beside her.
And I think you referenced Dr. Abel as just being a community champion for everyone, not just Evelyn. I think it's so easy nowadays for people to see someone doing well and for them to come at it with a position of jealousy or disparaging. Because I think there's this false belief that if you're doing well, I can't do well, right? Or if you're doing well, you must have had a rich dad, or exactly. And Evelyn's dad was adopted. Dad was an alcoholic, and they were not financially well off. And it's and I got to give John credit too for seizing that opportunity. Because again, like in the 1930s, girls weren't going out becoming pilots. That's not what was expected of women to do at that time.
And they wouldn't be flying to all these communities and giving over 5,000 people a ride.
Right,
He was there to show that this woman was capable of giving an opportunity to a community to see what the world was like from above.
Yeah.
I mean, that was huge.
We take that for granted now. I fly on commercial flights all the time, and if I'm not by a window, I'm always trying to get a peek out. And I fly the same flights all the time. I'm always looking out the window.
Well, sure, because you're a pilot.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're all crazy about what it looks like outside.
Yeah. For some reason that perspective can change you.
Well, I don't know. You asked me if there's anything else that I would like to say. I just am so grateful for people like you, Meredith, who have kind of taken Evelyn Sharp under your wing and
in a way,
wanted to make sure she's not forgotten. Your airplane is beautiful. Her picture, her name in script that she actually wrote, the signature that you see on the side of your airplane, and then you go to fly-ins and you have her story that people can read, and I just thank you so very, very much.
That is my
so
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
You put in decades and decades of work. The least I can do is go around and keep the story going. So
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely,
Like
my pleasure. It's nice to, we fly for fun, right? I don't fly for a living, so it's nice to be able to have a greater purpose or greater good tied to that. So yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. So
yeah, well, and for me in particular, because I'm a woman, for what she did, she's a role model for a lot of women. And I talked about, you know, perseverance and commitment, and that can be extended also to boys and to men. But it's huge. A lot of the women today who fly look to the women Air Force service pilots who actually led the way to show the country, we'll just say at this point, you know, that women are capable.
yeah.
And you know that I'm giving a pair of earrings that belong to Evelyn, P-38 airplanes, giving them to an F-16 pilot in Lincoln who will fly the air show with them. I mean,
Captain Amy Rebel Wilson.
Yeah.
And I think the cool thing, I mean, my daughter's kind of like, whatever, you know, like she's 9.
Yeah.
She knows girls can fly and it's no big deal, you know, just because of how it is now. There's no doubt in her mind that if she wanted to become a pilot, she can. And I'm not going to force her to. Like, she'll fly along every now and then, but to her, it's not a matter of a glass ceiling she has to break. It's entirely possible.
But there is kind of a glass ceiling, Meredith, because there are still very few women who are in aviation as commercial pilots, the military.
It's like about 7%, maybe.
Pardon me?
I think it's about 7%.
Yeah, it's low, and because it's just the way sometimes men and women deal with one another, okay, as to whether or not opportunities are open without any kind of gender bias. It's
If you can't think of anything else, again, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for driving out here to Shenandoah.
fine. I loved it.
Yeah.
It's great. Thanks for the ride.
Yeah, you bet.
Oh, wonderful. Oh.
But I'm glad you got to see the plane finally, and
So am I.
you got to fly in it.
We've been trying to do this for some time.
For 2 years.
We just couldn't make it happen. So
Yeah.
it's a beautiful day out here, and it's in God's country.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.